Good day, everyone. This is Charmaine for ClintChamSpeaks, the headlines. And for today's news, I'll be getting it from The National, one of UAE's leading newspapers. The headline goes like this: United Nations and major states praise UAE-Israel Accord. Minister of State for Foreign Affairs Gargash says the UAE has seen an encouraging response to normalizing relations with Israel. The international response to the UAE's decision to normalize relations with Israel has been encouraging, particularly the recognition of its importance to preserving the prospects of Israeli-Palestinian peace. Minister of State for Foreign Affairs Dr. Anwar Gargash said on Friday. The positive reactions from the main capitals to the tripartite declaration are encouraging, especially as it addressed the danger of annexing the Palestinian territories to the chances of a two-state solution, Dr. Gargash said in a tweet. The agreement, known as the Abraham Accord, was announced on Thursday after a phone conversation between U.S. President Donald Trump, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi and Deputy Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The UAE agreed to establish diplomatic relations with Israel in exchange for the suspension of Israel's plan to annex a large area of Palestinian territory in the West Bank. The accord also envisaged travel between the two countries, trade including of technology and goods, and cooperation in areas such as food security, climate change, and energy, according to a statement released by the U.S. Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed's courageous decision expresses a reality we desperately need. A successful decision is a give and take, and this is what has been achieved, Dr. Gargash said. The accord was welcomed by the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres and the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, Nikolay Mladinov, who said he hoped it would create opportunities for Israeli and Palestinian re-engagement. Stefan Dujarric, spokesman for Mr. Guterres, noted that the deal suspends Israel annexation plans over parts of the occupied West Bank, something the Secretary General has consistently called for. Peace in the Middle East is more important than ever as the region confronts the grave threats of COVID-19 and radicalization, he said. Joseph Borrell, the European Union's top diplomat, said the UAE-Israel Accord benefits both and is important for regional stability. Suspending annexation is a positive step. Plans should now be abandoned altogether, Mr. Borrell said on Twitter. EU hopes for resumed Israeli-Palestinian negotiations on two-state solution based on international agreed parameters. Britain and France were among the first European nations to welcome the agreement. The UAE and Israel's decision to normalize relations is hugely good news, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said on Twitter on Thursday. It was my profound hope that annexation did not go ahead in the West Bank, and today's agreement to suspend those plans is a welcome step on the road to a more peaceful Middle East. UK Foreign Minister Dominic Raab said it was time for direct talks between the Palestinians and Israel, the only route to lasting peace. France's Foreign Affairs Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian called Israel's decision to suspend its annexation plans under the deal a positive step that paved the way for a resumption of talks on establishing a separate Palestinian state. The two-state solution is the only option to achieve peace in the region, Mr. Le Drian said. On Friday, President Emmanuel Macron hailed the UAE's courageous decision to normalize ties with Israel. The French leader also lauded the UAE for its desire to contribute to the establishment of a just and lasting peace between the Israelis and Palestinians. And in Germany, Foreign Affairs Minister Heiko Maas tweeted his support for the accord, saying he had spoken to his Israeli counterpart Gabi Ashkenazi. Normalization of relations between Israel and UAE can be the starting point for positive developments in the region and give new impetus to the Middle East peace process, he said. Across the Atlantic, Mr. Trump's presidential rival and former Vice President Joe Biden praised the UAE for its welcome, brave, and badly needed act of statesmanship. It is a timely reminder that enmities and differences even long-standing ones, are not set in stone, and of the role American diplomacy can play, Mr. Biden said. The U.S. ambassador to the UAE, John Rakolta, said the country had taken a bold step towards securing broader peace in the Middle East for generations to come, and noted that it was the first GCC state to recognize the benefits that normalization will bring. Fellow GCC members Bahrain and Oman endorsed the UAE's move on Friday. Bahrain congratulated the UAE's leaders on the accord, which would make the UAE the third Arab state to establish ties with Israel. A statement published by the state news agency said the agreement halting the annexation of Palestinian territories was a step towards achieving peace in the Middle East. Oman supported the UAE's historic decision and hoped it would lead to sustainable peace, the foreign ministry said in a statement carried by the state news agency ONA. Egypt, a strong UAE ally, also welcomed the accord, with President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi saying on Twitter he appreciated it for the sake of the region's prosperity and stability. Egypt, a strong UAE ally. Egypt was the first Arab nation to establish diplomatic relations with Israel after the neighbors signed a peace treaty in 1979 and has frequently intervened to mediate flare-ups in violence between Israel and Palestinian groups in the Gaza Strip. Mr. Netanyahu on Friday tweeted a message of thanks to Egypt, Oman, and Bahrain for backing the accord, which he said was expanding the circle of peace and will be good for the entire region. Jordan, which established diplomatic ties with Israel in 1984, said Israel should regard the accord as an incentive to end the occupation and meet the Palestinian people's right to freedom and an independent and viable state. Jordan supports any real effort that contributes to achieving a just and comprehensive peace. The official Petra news agency quoted Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi as saying. However, Hamas, the Islamic Party which controls the Gaza Strip, opposed the agreement, as did Hanan Ashrawi, a member of the rival Palestinian Liberation Organization's executive committee. Iran and Turkey also rejected the accord. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said on Friday that Turkey was considering closing its embassy and suspending diplomatic ties with the UAE in response. Turkey itself has diplomatic and trade ties with Israel, but relations have been strained for years. In Asia, India, Japan, and China have expressed support for the UAE's initiative while reiterating the right of Palestinians to an independent state. A statement from the Indian Ministry of Foreign Affairs said India has consistently supported peace, stability, and development in West Asia, which is its extended neighborhood. In that context, we welcome the full normalization of ties between UAE and Israel. Both nations are key strategic partners of India. India continues its traditional support for the Palestinian cause. We hope to see early resumption of direct negotiations to find an acceptable two-state solution. The Japanese Foreign Ministry said the suspension of the application of sovereignty over the West Bank by the State of Israel as a result of this agreement is a positive development, and Japan welcomed it as a step towards easing tensions and stabilizing the region. China said it welcomed any measure that helps in easing tensions between the Middle Eastern countries and promotes regional peace and stability. Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian said Beijing would continue to firmly support the Palestinian people's cause of restoring their legitimate national rights and building national independence. And that's the latest update from the world, courtesy of the National. Thank you so much, and stay tuned for another ClintChamSpeaks episode, The Headline. This is Charmaine. Good day.